Hello YouTube, Paul here once again, back again with another very interesting video. I think you're going to love it if you're a guitar player, and if you're not a guitar player, there might be something in it for you as well in terms of process and processing. So without further ado, let's get started. So one thing that I want you to understand as a guitar player doing tonal shaping and tone sculpting and tone chasing is whenever you are doing that, whenever you sit down to do that, are you sitting down to create a tone that you're recording for mixing, or are you just having fun and practicing? Can it be both? Well, that's kind of up to the tone and how you feel about it. A more satisfying tone typically doesn't work very well for recording and for mixing. And vice versa, recording and mixing tones are kind of like, I don't know, so when it comes to practicing, right? So that's something to keep in mind as we delve into this project together. So to streamline this process and to make it easy for yourself and for myself, I like to actually sit down and pick an impulse response that I already know sounds good. Whether that's one from Bogren Digital, whether it's the cabinet section of a favorite amp simulator, whatever it might be, it's really important to just pick something that you know works for you already to a certain level. And then don't change it throughout this process, okay? Really don't change it. So here's the IR that I'm using. It's the Bogren Digital down-tuned Bomber 74. That's what I'll be using for this. As you can see on my screen, the input's at 0, gates off, transpose is off, output is off. Everything other than this section right here is turned off. The next thing you're going to want to do is to select your amplifier that you're going to be using. Naturally, it's really important to pick one that will achieve the tone that you think it's going to achieve for you. And I'm not talking about pedals yet or gates or anything else like that. I'm just talking just the amplifier. So in this example, this is what I'm going to be using. I'm going to use the Gojira Plugin X version, the new one from Neural DSP. Now the first thing that you want to do is turn the volume off on your guitar and turn all of the equalization knobs on the amplifier off, including depth and presence. What you want to then do is switch to the neck pickup on your guitar and turn up your volume knob. Now, get your gain knob on your amplifier plugin and turn it up just to the point where you can start to hear it really activating with that neck pickup. And just be aware that you might need to adjust this later, but this is just for now. From this point of view, I want you to turn the knob of the bass up until you hear it start to saturate. Now similarly, when you switch to the bridge pickup, do the same with the middle and with the treble sounds on the amplifier. Now finally, you may have a depth and presence knob, and there's a master knob as well, and we'll deal with the master knob in a moment, but for the depth and presence, it's a similar process. You want to be in the neck position for depth and bridge position for the presence knob, just to dial it in, just at the point where it starts to actually make some kind of a sound. Now, going to the master knob and the level knob, or the output knob, depending on what plugin you use, what amp you've got. This is down to complete personal taste. I usually like it to be at a very neutral position. This plugin is very reliably good in its default mode. Now from here, what you can do is chug along and be very happy that you've got a reasonably good tone. Or you can ask the question, where's the problem? Is it high or low? Because if you're wanting a bit more high-end information, okay, it's higher. Okay, so mess with your treble. Oh, it's higher than that. Okay, mess with your presence. Oh, it's lower than that. Mess with your mid. And do that on the bridge pickup. If it comes to the neck pickup side, that's when you're dealing with your bass and your depth. Add to taste, of course, and the gain knob should be adding to taste as well. Now, the next thing that you might want to consider is putting an EQ in before your amp block. This will adjust the sound of your input of your guitar. Don't be afraid of doing this. There's no reason to be afraid of doing this whatsoever. A lot of people really don't want to mess with their DIs. Mess with your DI. Do you not like how much bass your guitar seems to have? Maybe it resonates in a way that makes 300 hertz really loud. And you don't want that. Well, go ahead and get rid of it. Just carve it out of the EQ and see how that changes the interaction with the amplifier plugin or the amplifier. Now, another thing you might want to do is add an equalizer after the impulse response. That way you can also shape what's going on with the impulse response. Especially if you're recording, I highly recommend that you do this because you can duck out those bass frequencies which usually interact with the bass guitar and with the kick drum and with toms sometimes. It's just really good to get rid of some of those frequencies on the guitar. Now personally, I really love this plugin. It's called IRDX. It's from Bogren Digital, and I highly recommend it to everyone. They might not endorse me. I certainly do endorse them with this plugin for sure. It adds a lot of dynamic to a sound that is supposed to be dynamic. When you think about impulse responses and amplifiers and things like that, they're responding in terms of reality in real time to what you're doing with the guitar, to the electronic output of your picking. You know what I mean? So why would you have a static impulse response and static amplifier response to something which is supposed to be dynamic? It doesn't make sense. IRDX simulates that kind of part of reality in a way that's so satisfying. I just think it's absolutely a mandatory thing. Now, finally, what I recommend you do, especially if you're going for a lead tone, is to send this signal out on a bus. And you're gonna go and send it to a bus that you're gonna call Verb. Now, on this Verb bus, you want to actually have a filter at the beginning, meaning an EQ. And that is because I don't trust what other companies do in terms of their equalization ducking, in terms of the curve. So if you imagine an EQ, a lot of the times they have a high cut and a depth. And depth kind of seems to boost a lot of bass, and the high cut cuts the highs, of course. But I don't know how much and what that curve looks like. Why would I depend on that? So I would rather have that control. So there's always going to be an EQ before my reverb on the reverb bus. So this is what I'm talking about. Why would I trust any kind of treble, decay, bass, or mid, or whatever kind of EQ when I could just EQ the signal directly from the guitar coming in from the archetype Gojira and that whole chain? Like, I would rather do that. I would rather do that. Don't tell me what to do. At the same time, it's worthwhile to check out what that reverb plugin's doing, but like, do it yourself. The next thing I would recommend after having the EQ and then the reverb is to have something called a dynamic EQ after the reverb. This could be Soothe 2 if you want. It could be just a regular Fab Filter Pro Q3 setting on the dynamic mode. What you're hunting for is resonances that you don't like. Very specifically resonances though, okay? This is why I recommend Soothe 2, because it's like so easy to use. At the same time, it's a plugin that not everybody has. So hunt for those annoying resonances with, you know, a regular EQ plugin or a dynamic EQ. Again, really, I'm stressing dynamic EQ is probably for the best. You don't want to shape your reverb that much.
What you might notice is a strange sensation of swimming in reverb. Don't drown it. You don't want to swallow your dry signal that much. The other thing is that my dry signal sounds awfully bright for a lead tone. So I'm going to go back and EQ it a little bit. Here we go. So we're going to go to this guy and we're going to actually put in a high shelf filter. So this is what that's going to do. And as you can hear, that kind of puts the guitar's dry signal a little bit further back, but it also mixes better with the reverb. It still is present, it's still in front of you, you can still hear it, but it's just that much more different. Now the other thing is that we're sending this full send into the reverb bus, but the reverb bus doesn't always have to be drenching our dry tone. So let's just hear it sounds when I remove a lot of the volume. So that's all that I really need is minus 10 dB worth of reverb. It is at this point that I really would like to have a little bit more gain. So I just set my overdrive pedal up here and it's sounding right. I usually don't like to go past these kinds of variables just because it becomes really hairy, and it is already quite gainy as you can hear. So there is that. So in terms of resonant frequencies, if I just play a couple notes, I can immediately see what the reverb is doing here. This is the EQ after the verb, right? This is what I mean by dynamic EQ. There's a dynamic range here, and you can make it quite ridiculous. Now I kind of want it to not be touched too hard, but I think right about there is going to be just fine. Just fine. So let's listen to that now that I've picked some bands here. It sounds really, really smooth and really clean. I liked it a lot.
Now at the end of all that, I always try to add a compressor that's just trying to lift a little bit of the noise floor of the reverb. Why I like to have a compressor at the end of my reverb, and a lot of people might be like, what are you thinking? It's entirely so that I don't have to change the response time of the reverb in terms of pre-delay or the actual decay, and I can just lift the volume without even using a fader. That's the whole point of having a compressor at the end. Maybe I just want a little bit more volume as it's fading out. So it'll be like a longer release, that kind of stuff. You can take a look at the settings on the screen for things that work well.
What I'm doing right now is just playing one note so that I can see how far that reverb goes. So it looks like it starts already quite quietly and it goes very quickly down, right? So we want to decrease the threshold quite low. I want it to be like right around there. To be a soft knee. And I want the range, I want the range to go like that. I just wanted to bring that stuff up really slow. Let's see what that's going to do for us here. So let's A and B that just so you can hear what I'm talking about. So this is with it off. See, now isn't that just lovely? That's pretty cool. That's pretty great. And again, without it. There you go. So really, really uber low threshold. My ratio is at, let's see, 3.4 to 1. My attack is fast, my release is fast, whatever. And the range is big in terms of is plus 60 dB, and the knee is soft. So that's the settings for the compression, so that you can lift your reverb and you don't have to change anything on your actual reverb itself. And you can make it feel like it's lasting longer. Basically, I'm just lifting it enough.
Now, one thing I will say is if you do decide to use this bus, for example, never automate your reverb time. This isn't a side note. Never do that. You're going to have pops and clicks. Now, in an analog world, if you have a reverb pedal or a delay pedal, if you start to turn up the time or turn down the time, you get a really cool, swirly, almost sounding effect, which is wonderful. But I've found in the digital realm, it always goes and it sounds tremendously bad. It's not a cool thing to do, okay? So you don't want to necessarily do that. The other problem with automating reverbs is if you do it at the wrong moment, you'll hear that click and that pop. So just be aware, automation in reverbs is very, very delicate. So ultimately, this whole video is about taking the time to sculpt your tone and doing it once for this guitar that you currently have in your hands. You can follow this process along with any amplifier and any IR, impulse response, but just make some decisions. That's the whole point, is you want to make decisions in this whole process. And that leads me to talk about my next thing. What if all these plugins are really causing your computer to panic? And I mean panic. My computer likes to panic whenever I have too many plugins too. And that's just the way that it goes. So why not create iterations of your tracks and print your effects onto them? It's a very easy thing to make sure that you have the old version of your recording. So let's say you're recording a guitar part for a cover and you really like the way that the plugins sound, but it's just not able to work at the same time as everything else because it's just too many plugins and you don't know how to fix it. Well, print your effects and then save them to other tracks. In Pro Tools, there's also playlists if you want to use playlists. The idea is to keep copies of your work organized and exactly where they are. You can even date them and say what effects are on them, because I mean, in Pro Tools land, it automatically puts a small version of the name of the effect that had happened. But I think this is a really great idea. You can audio suite it with the same settings as the plugin that you're using, and then you can just deactivate the plugin or just completely get rid of it if you like, and save the information for yourself as a preset in that plugin, being like, oh yeah, 1st of May 2024, guitar tone, this cover. You know, like it's not that difficult. You just need to be organized. It's really important to be organized. And that leads me to my next topic, which is templating. This whole process can be templated. You can save presets like this for yourself forever, because the whole point of this is to save time so that when you're feeling creative, for me it's in the morning. If I'm feeling creative in the morning, I don't want to have to rifle around and do tone hunting and sculpting like this. No, I want to sit down, have a sip of my coffee and go and just start to create some music. So this is the whole point. Save your templates even down to the day, down to the hour if that helps you, and make sure that you're making decisions about the things that you like and don't like. Be aware of the fact that at the end of the day when you're mixing, or end of the day when you're practicing, the way that your ears hear audio changes. Meaning to say, in the morning, you're going to hear way more of the high frequencies than in the evening because your ears get tired. Not only that, you also have no caffeine, ideally, in your system in the evening because caffeine changes the way that your ears hear things as well. Isn't that interesting? When I learned that, I was like, I almost wanted to track that EQ curve to see what I could and couldn't hear, and I still might do that. Now, this process probably would work quite well on a few other kinds of instruments. I wouldn't use it for bass, definitely wouldn't use it for drums. But I might use it on stringed instruments, basically, or dulcimers or things of that nature that, you know, maybe I wouldn't have distortion on a dulcimer, but that could be really cool. But the idea is there and it's apparent, right? You want to have the best sound possible before you even add any of these plugins. And that's this whole thought process. You start with the impulse response and the amp block, and you take it from there. If you want to add that guitar pedal on the plugin that you have, like in the Gojira, there's the overdrive pedal. Add it and add it to taste, but always start with making the plugin start to do some work first before you add that much gain because you might not need it, especially if you're recording, and you might not even need it, especially if you're practicing in certain instances too. I hope that you found this video very informative and helpful, and I hope that you can rely on it as a guide into the future to create tones with new guitars that you have, with old guitars that you have, with new pickups that you have in the guitars, because every guitar is different and every preset should reflect that. You shouldn't have one preset for 10 guitars. It doesn't really work that way. People are always like, how do I get that sound? Well, you make sure that you can get the best sound out of your hands and out of your plugins and out of that one guitar first. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments and what tones you've been creating, and I'll catch you next time.